you know, very much apply to everything that you've gone through. We are just about to start our eyewitness memory chapter. And so I thought, what better than to hear from somebody that's gone through it, and also to hear about the amazing things that you're doing now that you're past everything. So kind of without further ado, thank you so much, Ms. Thompson, for coming in and speaking to the class today.
No, thank you. Thank you for having that very cool background. I
I made
mean,
it
like,
just for you.
I need to do that. Somebody teach me how to do that. So that's cool. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Have the students, have you all read Picking Cotton?
I think some have, and I have a few professor friends in here as well that have read it.
Okay.
But not everybody, but I did encourage them as much as possible to watch the couple 60-minute clips that are on YouTube of that one that really is excellent. I watched it again yesterday. That really kind of at least tells the big things about, you know, what happened, and also some of the science that's behind it, which is what I teach. And actually those videos are required in my class and are on the exam. So you guys' story is in the required knowledge.
Good, thank you. All right, so how do you want me to do this? Would you like for me to kind of open it up to questions? Do you want me to talk a little bit about where I am today and what I'm doing, or this is your class, so I'm here to do whatever you want me to do?
I think maybe just starting off with how you're doing and what you're doing today. I gave them some information about healing justice, and you know, looked over all the information, but just tell us a little bit about that, and then hopefully we'll have some good questions from the class.
So I'm doing well. Thought, you know, it's always interesting when people think that they know me, and you know, well, you know, like if you've read the book or you've watched the 60 Minutes piece, and for some reason I get frozen in time, so people still think that I'm raising 5-year-old triplets, when in actuality my grandson turns 4 today, and the triplets are 30, and so yeah, things kind of, you know, didn't get locked in time. Life is very busy. Healing Justice keeps me extremely busy. You know, I'm the founder, I'm the president of the nonprofit. I volunteer all my time, and I am a major financial contributor to the project. But it just keeps me busy. And when I'm not busy with Healing Justice, I'm getting phone calls from death row or exonerees or crime survivors who just, you know, have a lot of needs, as you can imagine. And so my mornings start abruptly, and my evenings, often I'm on the phone, like I was last night with a recent exoneree. Those of you may have heard about him, Ronnie Long, out of North Carolina, 44 years in prison for a crime that happened in 1976. So that my life is just very weird and complicated and extremely interesting. I'm going to move my computer because my cat thinks that you guys want to see her as well, which we don't.
Well, we're fine. We're fine with seeing animals.
Well, she's really cute. She's also an extreme pain in my neck. So yeah, life is just busy. I love the work I do. I feel extremely lucky and grateful that I get to work with a very eclectic mix of individuals, from, you know, law and justice practitioners, lobbyists, politicians, governors, police departments, prosecutors, judges, victims advocate offices. But I also get to work with people who've been, you know, directly impacted by the system failures. We're doing lots of projects at Healing Justice. We have a project going on right now that's our juror project, where we are interviewing and talking to jurors that were sitting in on these cases 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and find themselves opening up the newspaper and realizing that they were asked as citizens of this country to participate in a criminal justice system procedure that failed, and they weren't given all the information, or they were giving false information, and they were asked to render a judgment on a human being. So just imagine that, to render a judgment on a human being. And then one day you're sipping your coffee or you're turning on the news at night and you find out that this case that you were on was an actual wrongful conviction, and that you participated, even though you didn't know you were participating in a wrongful conviction. You were doing the best you could. You were rendering a verdict based on what information you were given. But regardless, it was a failure, and how that affects their lives. And we've heard from several of our jurors that talk about, I feel like when I die, I'm going to burn in hell. I feel like I would rather just go ahead and commit suicide than to live another day knowing that this happened. And so we know at Healing Justice that the depths and width and breadth of harm caused by a wrongful conviction is so huge, right? When you listen to the news or you read an article about a wrongful conviction, which you guys are doing, oftentimes the story is a singular narrative, right? It's the story of the wrongfully convicted person. And then the story's done and it's over. But what you're not hearing is the stories from the exonerated mother as she waited at home for him for 30 years, or the sister who was left at home at the age of 14, who had to make sure that the laundry was done on the weekends and homework got done and meals got made because mom was at the prison visiting her son. And that would take 15 years of her life. You're not listening to the stories of the children who got left behind and were put in foster care because the parent was removed. And they didn't have a relationship now 28 years later with their dad or their mother. And the whole family got broken. But you also aren't hearing the stories of the crime survivor, the child whose mother was abducted, raped, tortured, a stick shoved down her throat that crushed her voice box so she could not scream for help, and a stick shoved into her vagina and it perforated her bowels while she was being raped and murdered. So you're not hearing those stories of the victims, the rape survivors, the 12-year-old who's raped at knife point while she's sleeping in bed, and it's a wrongful conviction 18 years later. So what's wrong with this area of wrongful convictions is you're really reading and hearing about these singular narratives, these singular voices. And the truth is that those stories are not honest because they're not full. They're not in totality. And so you're getting a narrative that is from the perspective of a wrongfully convicted person, and they should tell their story. Their story is vitally important. But so's their family, and so's the victim. We're also not hearing the stories about the secondary or collateral victims that we work with. Those people who were raped because the guilty person was still in the streets, or the family members whose children were murdered because the murderer was never apprehended. So again, when we think about wrongful convictions, and we're thinking about that one voice, right? The voice of Ronnie Long, which is an incredibly important voice to hear. We really need to think about it in probably 100 times that when we think about the harm. So I just want you to keep that in mind, because one of the problems we've had in reforming and transforming our judicial system as it relates to wrongful convictions is those that are making the laws and those that are, looking at policies are thinking about wrongful convictions in really relatively small numbers. 2,800 wrongfully convicted men and women. Some states will say to you, well, we don't even have any wrongfully convicted people. I was in Arkansas years ago, and I remember the dean of the law school said, yeah, we used to have an Innocence Project, but we just stopped it because we don't have any innocent people in prison in Arkansas. Mm-hmm. So when we think about that, the reason why the reforms have been so difficult is because it's a relatively small number that we think about. But I believe if we're thinking about 2,800 wrongfully convicted folks, then I think we multiply that by 100, and that is the number of people harmed. And so it's really a big problem. It's epidemic, I believe, in our prison systems. We've got 2.3 million people in our prisons in America. I think conservatively, we can think 5% of those folks are innocent. But those are the people who go to prison. What about the people who take plea deals? 97% of all these cases, people plea out because they're scared, because they can't afford to do 20 years in prison. And they know they didn't commit the crime, but man, I can do 3 years. So those are also numbers that we don't think about. The ones that have taken a plea bargain and were innocent, but their lives got ruined anyway. So that's kind of an open, like, I just wanted to throw that out at you, see where it lands.
That juror project sounds amazing. I never thought about that.
Yeah, we're really excited about that. The juror project is something no one's thought about. I've thought about it for a very, very long time. And we're also getting ready to launch a new project called Wrongful Liberty. So looking at these cases from a different lens as opposed to wrongful conviction. What about wrongful liberty? What about all those people that got hurt because Bobby Poole was not apprehended when he should have been? You know, Bobby Poole stayed on the streets of Burlington, North Carolina for 9 more months and committed 24 more violent crimes, 6 of which were first-degree rapes. And one of the rapes he committed, he went back and raped the woman a second time. So that's the concept of wrongful liberty, this idea of not getting the guilty person at the beginning and leaving communities really at the hands and the expense of a serial rapist, a murderer, a very violent person.
I had a question that I thought of, since we just had talked about how race impacts wrongful convictions in general. And I know you do a lot of talking with lots of different groups, as you said. Do you find that they're more open-minded to someone who's been a victim and also a white woman, compared to hearing from a wrongfully convicted person who is, you know, Black?
Well, are you referring to like legislators, policymakers,
Yeah.
types of folks?
Yeah.
You know, such a fascinating thing, to be honest with you. And I can't remember what state I was in. I want to say it was Kentucky. I can't remember. It could have been West Virginia. And I was testifying for changing their best practices on how to collect eyewitness identification, because so many states are just, they're doing it the way they did in 1930. And we know better ways of doing it. It's just, you know, our legal system is not like our medical system. Our legal system is like, yeah, we're fine. You know, it worked in 1920. It's working now. There's no need to reform. And so I was testifying, and I was with an exoneree. And I honestly, in truth, I can't remember if the exonerated person was African American or white. But I remember the legislators coming up to me later and saying, you know, like, it really sucks what happened to that guy, and, you know, I really feel bad for him. But it's when I hear you tell your story that I think to myself, oh God, like, we need to put eyewitness identification in place. And I don't know if it's because I'm a white female. I don't know if it's because I'm female. I don't know if it's because I'm a survivor. I'm not sure what it is, but I do know that when you think about people who are making policies and laws in this country, I mean, we all have a visual that comes up, right? Like, how many people think the person in this country making our laws is an African American female, or an African American man, or a Latino person? I mean, we all know that the people making the laws are these old white men, right? I mean, that's who's making the laws, and the laws are being put in place to safeguard people that look like them. So when I testify and I speak, what often happens is they resonate with me. They can look at me and go, that could have been my wife. That could have been my daughter. And there they can go. Where they can't go is thinking about, oh, that exoneree could be me, because they can't go there, right? They're not African American, they're not poor, they're not strung out on drugs or living on the streets, people that are really vulnerable. I mean, people who are easy to disappear in the system and no one cares. And so that's where there's that disconnect. They're not able to empathize with an exonerated person, because those, generally speaking, are people that if they left society, you're never going to know. They're on the margins anyway. And that's why they're easy to railroad.
Not monopolize the conversation. Does anyone else have questions, or I can keep shooting some more?
I've got one, but I want your students to go first.
Well, they're generally quiet, so go ahead.
Okay, I'll go ahead then. So this is actually a question that I had from a student I had in my class last year. One of the courses I teach here is comparative criminal justice systems. And so this student was curious about whether this is a particular issue, wrongful convictions is a particular issue in the US because of the adversarial system that we use. And in the UK as well, it's the same system. And he was wondering whether this is the same problem in continental Europe, where we use an inquisitorial system and there's a difference in the role of the prosecutor and the judge, and there's also less use of plea bargains. So do you think, it's a numbers issue, or is it related to the United States system? Is it related to the adversarial system and the role of the prosecutors and the defense attorneys?
For some reason, the sound went down for me.
Yeah,
it's
me
a little
too.
softer. No. I don't know what's going on. Mm-mm. No. I don't know what just happened. It just went really quiet. We can barely hear you. Very little. Okay. Zoom. Just for a little background context for students that aren't in the wrongful conviction class that are in here, we did present a map of the world and the innocence networks, and there are innocence projects popping up all around the world, but most of them are in the United States. So potentially, definitely more of an issue here, or is it just not necessarily caught on as much elsewhere? I don't know. That'll be interesting to hear her perspective.
Can you hear me now?
It's the same.
Can you hear me?
Mm-mm.
Now any better?
You have headphones? Sometimes that helps.
Yeah, I'm trying to. I'm so sorry.
No worries.
I'm going to go downstairs, so just hold on 1 second.
Okay. It's a little bit louder.
I'm not sure what it is. honey? I'm on a Zoom call and my sound keeps going out. Can you guys hear me down here?
A little bit better, yeah.
Yeah.
A little bit better?
Yeah.
Okay. So I may have to use your computer, but I'm not sure. All right, I'm going to go over here and we'll see. We'll see if this works. So we were talking about other countries.
Yes.
Okay. So the one thing I can tell you, and again, I don't know the law, and so I don't really want to talk too much about that, but I will tell you that one of the things that we do see is we have a love affair of violence. We are the most violent country. We love punishment, and we're very punitive. So I think based on the fact that, you know, we're allowed to carry guns, we have more murders, we have more violence, and we also have this strange love affair of incarceration and punishment. I think that's one of the things that lends itself to why we see so many more problems in our criminal justice system. You know, I mean, our country started off being, our country started off coming over and murdering people right off the bat. And so I just think that's one of the things that lends itself to such high rates of wrongful convictions. Nancy, I know you had a question, Nancy.
I did. So I was just wondering, from like a victim standpoint, what kind of like your mental like thought process was throughout the whole process of like your court case. Like I just kind of wanted to know your standpoint on that.
My mental process?
Just like throughout the whole like court, like what was that like for you?
You know, so obviously, you know, sexual assault for any of you have ever experienced it, know what I'm saying. Sexual assault, of course, you lose your voice, you lose your power, you lose who you had been moments before the assault happens. Then you go through the investigation phase. And I think the investigation, I was pretty much numb. I think the only thing that kept me alive during all of that was my desire to see him punished. And because my personality is one where I'm very oriented towards task, like I need to have a job, I need to have a focus. And I think that's part of the thing that kept me alive the night of my assault was my task of trying to remember who he was and surviving. The court case was much the same. I was driven for justice. I was driven to make sure he was put in prison. And then when the court case was over, like I had nothing, right? All of a sudden now you're just left with yourself, and what do you do now? And of course, people will look at you, and my family looked at me and friends looked at me and said, okay, now you're fine. Like now you're okay, right? Like you can just go back to normal, but there is no normal. There's nothing that you had in the past that is even recognizable to you now. So you're left with trying to figure out who you're going to be. And I will tell you, I work with lots and lots of assault survivors, and 97% of us will either engage in some type of self-harming, whether that is eating disorders or drugs and alcohol or other types of self-harm, suicide ideation, depression, anxiety, paranoia. And then oftentimes we react in ways that people don't understand, which is sexual promiscuity. We're just like, you know what, screw it, I'll just have sex with everybody. Because at least I can control that, right? And it's this idea of feeling dislocated from who you are and your own skin, so that nothing matters now. Who cares? And so recovery during all that time, honestly, was a disaster. It was a mess because nobody wanted to talk to me about what had happened. And because I didn't have any gunshot wounds or knife, serrated knife edges across my throat, people would look at me and say, well, at least you're okay. Like, at least he didn't hurt you. And so you're really left alone. It was a very lonely experience. It was very lonely and isolating. Even the court, it was just really isolating.
Yeah, I mean, I know a few sexual assault victims myself, and I just feel like it's very hard for me to be able to like talk to them or like kind of relate on that subject. But is there anywhere like you guys could go for help or like after like your?
There are now. I mean, Nancy, you know, now every county has got a rape crisis center, and there's places like that that you can reach out to. But that too is lonely. It's a really scary thing to get in your car and drive to a rape crisis center or make that phone call. I'll tell you, for those of you who will encounter sexual assault survivors, and there's many of us, you know, 1 in 5 women will be assaulted, raped before the age of 18. It's like 1 in 9 for males. The highest community of sexual assault victims are the LGBTQ community and Native American communities. I mean, the sexual assault rate is so high. We're doing a project right now with telehealth, and I was listening to a presentation about these communities in the tundra of Alaska, and it was alarming that 51% of all the women in these tribal communities will be a sexual assault survivor and a victim of domestic violence. 51%. So it's astronomical. But the best thing that you can do when you encounter someone who is a survivor is you don't have to say anything, Nancy. Like, really what we ask is, did you sit with me and hold my hand and say to me, like, I have no idea what to say to you. I don't have any, I don't know the right words, but I'm going to sit with you and I'm going to be present with you, and I will witness whatever you need to say, and I will validate your experience. And that right there is one of the most healing gifts you can give someone who's experienced violence. Is just sit with them.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like all I've been able to do, or that's just kind of, I've just tried to be there for them, but thank you. I just wanted to hear your standpoint, or kind of from like your perspective, how it affected you.
Thank you for being there for them.
Thank you.
That's pretty cool.
I have a question.
Okay.
I'm just curious. Did you receive any compensation from the government? Because some exonerates are compensated by their state.
No. Not only was I not compensated, but the state of North Carolina sent me a bill for my rape kit for $500. Obviously, I didn't pay it. I reached out to my rape crisis volunteer and I said, am I actually supposed to do this? And of course, no, you're not. But I've never talked to a victim from any of these cases that has received any compensation or any help.
Yeah.
For those of you who are interested, we did a grant. We had a grant with the Office for Victims of Crime, which is part of the Department of Justice.
Uh-huh.
And our grant we did a 2-year project with survivors from these cases, the original victims, the murder victims, the rape survivors. And we have if you'll go on Healing Justice, there's a link that is survivorservices.org. You can click on that, and there's 2 really beautiful videos, one from the experiences of the rape survivors and one from the experiences of the murder victim family members. And you really get to hear what it was like for them, not just from the time of the crime, but throughout the exoneration process and what they were given and what they received. And what you will end up hearing is no one received anything. No one received any help at all.
That's bad.
Many of us were blamed. And only one of the murder victim family members that we work with has ever, that the case has ever been resolved. So all of our other murder victim family members, it is now a cold case. So just imagine if somebody that you loved is murdered and taken away from you, and you think that you've gotten justice, that the person who's killed the person that you love is gone to prison, and then you find out 20 years later, 30 years later, that the system got it wrong, and oh, by the way, we're not going to bother to figure out who killed your mom or your child or your brother. It's a cold case. And so these particular individuals that we work with are harmed all along throughout the spectrum of the system. And for the most part, very few of them ever receive justice. Some of our rape survivors, who a DNA test exonerated the person who they thought had raped them and found the person who had raped them. In some of the states, statute of limitations ran out, and so the person who did destroy their life is now free and will never be held accountable for what happened to them. And so it is just a disaster. It is a nightmare for people.
Yeah, it's very unfair on the part of the victim and the victim's family.
That's
right?
right.
You
That's right.
suffered more than the exoneree.
On many levels, you're correct. One of the things that we say at Healing Justice is when an exoneration happens, it is the dream come true for the wrongfully convicted, right? It's the
Yes.
day you have prayed for, your family has prayed for, and it's finally coming true. But for the victims, it's just a whole nother nightmare. It's just a
Wow.
whole nightmare. And it really angers me because if the system were doing what it was supposed to do at the very beginning
Uh-huh.
and holding itself accountable, the victims would have received justice. The guilty person would be off the streets, and it would have saved somebody like Ronald Cotton 11 years or Ronnie Long 44 years of their life.
So the victim just suffered for life, right?
Forever. Yeah, forever.
Yeah, forever. And the healing process is so difficult.
The healing process is really difficult. It's the reason why Healing Justice was created, because we needed to find a place for everybody who's hurt to come together and share their experiences. So we've hosted 16 healing retreats since we opened our doors in 2015. And our healing retreats are a cornerstone program where we bring together, we pay for. We can't do it now because of COVID, but we will start it again when COVID decides to go away. Where we bring together survivors and families and exonerated people and their families into this very safe space. And we use restorative justice principles where we begin to address the harm and the grief and the loss and the things that all of us lost. And there's a lot of commonality between the victims and the exonerees about what we lost. But they also get to hear each other's stories. And there's something really healing for an exonerated person to hear the stories from the victim's perspective, and from the victims to be able to hear the stories from the exoneree's perspective, but also for families. So for moms to be able to hear from other mothers, and for children to be able to hear from other children. And it helps in that part where I told you, you feel so alone. It's such an isolating experience. So to be able to bring folks together, to talk about what happened to us, and we do lots of different projects. And again, if you go on our website, which I hope you do, you'll see some of the art we've done at these retreats, the art therapy, we do improv games, which are extremely funny, and it helps us to laugh again. And for some folks, it might have been the first time they really laughed, like belly laughed, in decades. And we do lots of different activities together as a community of harmed people. And so what happens is you start healing together, and it creates a family that you get each other, and you don't have to explain it, but you get each other. So
thank you.
Yeah, of course. Any more questions?
I was curious how you came up with the name Healing Justice.
Well, when I started thinking about the project, I kind of threw out lines to people that had been colleagues of mine and said, here's what I'm thinking about doing. Throw some names at me. And I think it was Teresa Newman, and you all don't know her, but she's at Duke Law School. She runs the Duke Innocence Clinic. I think she threw Healing Justice somewhere in a title. And so we began to use it. And interestingly, we launched it in 2015, and then there's been like 4 more projects that have run off with my name, Healing Justice. So we're trying to figure that out.
Oh.
Yeah, there's like all these other healing justice things that are happening. So yeah, it's a little bit annoying, but I try to remember that, what is it? Imitation is the most sincere form of flattery.
Yeah.
I think it's just, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I have another question.
Okay.
I'm just curious, during the identification of, your offender, did a police investigator suggest something to you that you pick Ronald Cotton?
Yes. So, and that's part of, I know what the students are going to be learning soon is about eyewitness ID and how
Yeah.
memory can become very contaminated. It's very
Yeah.
easy for our memories. Remember, all your memories are contaminated, by the way.
Yeah, you're right.
All of you think you remember certain stories from your childhood that more than likely your mom told you 100 times, and in your head you think you remember when you were 3 years old walking down the street and you saw a frog. When in actuality, you probably don't remember that. You've just been told a story. In my case, 3 days after the assault, and I was asked to participate in the photographic lineup, and I picked Ronald's photograph out of 6. The investigator said, "Good job, that's who we thought it was." And that's what we call confirmation bias.
Uh-huh.
So when someone tells you, "Oh yeah, that's right," then what happens is your accuracy tends to go down and your confidence goes way up. But you would think it would be the opposite, right? You pick something or you do something, someone goes, "Oh, good job." You think that your accuracy now should go up, when in all actuality it goes down, but your confidence has gone through the roof. And then once that happened, Ronald's photograph was planted over my original memory. And so when you go then later, as the investigation proceeds, and in my case it was a physical lineup, and Ronald was the only person that was in the photographic lineup and in the physical lineup. So of course in my brain, as I'm looking through the physical lineup, what happens in my memory is like, oh my God, I remember that guy. And I do, because I just picked his photograph out a week ago, but that's not how my brain's processed it. My brain's processed it in, yep, that's the guy, because I picked him out in the photograph and the detective said, "Good job." And so I got it right. And therefore, that's how it happens with victims and witnesses of these crimes. It's completely unintentional, particularly from the perspective of the victim and witness. Because I will promise you this, there's no victim in the world ever who wants an innocent person to go to prison. Nobody. You want the guilty person in prison. So
I'm gonna ask this is a weird question. When you're raped, did you smell something about the person who raped you? Do you remember any what do you call it, smell? Particular smell?
well, I mean, he had been drinking alcohol and he'd been smoking cigarettes. So
that's all?
that's all I remember. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm just curious.
Yeah. I do have a question here from Lisa B about my relationship with Ronald now, and if there is one, and how did you go about that after realizing he was wrongfully convicted? So, I mean, Ronald and I are the same age. I gotta remember how old I am. I'm 58, he'll be 59 in December. So we were both 22 when it happened, and we were both 33 when the case gets resolved. And I met him 2 years after that, and in a small church, not far from where I'd been assaulted. And I wanted to meet him because I had things I needed to say, and he had things he needed to hear. And I, of course, apologized to him, and he said, "It's not your fault. it's Bobby Poole's fault. And we became friends that day. We began healing together, learning together, asking each other questions we both wanted to ask. And then our life became insane, because then every documentary, every magazine, every talk show wanted to have us on, and it just became crazy. So Ronald and I have kind of grown up together in a weird way. We're still very close friends, but our lives have separated since Healing Justice, because Healing Justice is what I do. And I would never expect Ronald to donate 40 hours a week for nothing. So Ronald's very happy. He lives not far from where I live, about 45 minutes. His daughter is, I think, 22 or 23. He has 2 grandchildren. I have 5. And we just saw each other a couple weeks ago. We recorded a presentation for the New Jersey County prosecutors. So he's doing well. His health is not great. He's had some strokes. He's got diabetes. He's got high blood pressure. But yeah, it's good.
Jennifer, hi. I had a quick question too. So, like, at one point, did you realize this is something like you want to dedicate your life, like, to, like, this project you're on, this whole program? Like, at one point, did you realize, okay, this is what I want to do?
I don't know that I ever decided that, to be honest with you, Destiny. I mean, I think in large part, what happened to me and to us and the journey was extremely organic, right? You take the next step that makes sense. You go and meet each other. You do an interview, and then you do 10 interviews. And then all of a sudden you write a book, and then you're off in Sweden and Mexico doing stuff. And then I think what happened for me in Healing Justice was I continued to be in spaces with other victims and other family members and other exonerees. And I kept kind of collecting these stories, and I kept wondering and waiting for the states who created the disaster, right? It's really the state's responsibility to step in and fix the messes that they made, but they're not going to. And I was watching people, exonerees who would come out of prison, and they, you see them, they're on the court steps, and they've got their fists raised up and the microphones in their face, and what's the first thing you want to eat, and what do you think you want to do, and it's all very exciting. And then 6 months later, no one even remembers who they are, because there's another exoneration and there's a new person on the court steps. And so their lives dissolve into a big problem, because you can't compensate somebody enough that it heals them. That's not where the healing is. You can give somebody $1 million and it's not going to heal their broken places. And it was the same for victims. And so I was watching all these broken people and kept thinking, there's got to be something where we can start addressing the aftermath of the harms. And that's where I wanted to step in. It was a space no one had stepped into. How do we use restorative justice principles in a way that we can begin to heal each other and this particular community? And I think devoting my life to it goes back to that part of my personality that I talked about, this task-oriented thing, that I'm driven by that. So yeah, I think it just happened. Honestly, I didn't make a decision one day. I didn't sit down and think, oh, I should devote my life to this. It just happened.
Other questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
Do you happen to remember what was his alibi at the time?
Yeah, his alibi. So it was complicated, Colleen. When he first went to the police station and they asked him your whereabouts on the evening of July 28th, the morning of July 29th, his response was he had been out clubbing. And these are the people I was clubbing with. And so they went to, of course, corroborate and spoke to his friends and people that he'd been clubbing with. And they said, no, that's not where we were. Ronald, by his own admission, would say that he was a party guy. He said it. I'll tell you, I don't know where I was. I mean, you know, one day bled into the next day. And I was out, you know, clubbing and drinking and whatever he was doing. That goes back to that part I told you about people on the margins that are very easy to get caught up into this kind of stuff. And so when they found out, you know, when they had asked him and his alibi was wrong, of course, what did it communicate to the investigators was he was a liar. When they went and talked to his family was like, no, he was sitting here at the house, he was drinking beer, we were watching TV at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you know, this is what he was wearing. But when you translate that into the criminal justice system, what that is he's a liar and his families are lying because that's what families do, and they lie for each other. Where was he that night? He was sitting on the couch drinking beer, watching TV. That's where he was. He had been clubbing the night before. But Ronald, you know, he would tell you, he's like, I didn't keep a calendar. I didn't write down where I was going to be. I just ended up places. And so.
We have a
I just
question.
wanted to make a comment about the project you're doing about the jurors, because I feel like I've always had this thought that like jurors typically are like, it's hard for them not to be biased. So I always thought like it would be hard for me to be a juror because I would, you know, I can't handle like going back and forth with like the prosecutor. Like that would just, you know, confuse me about what the real facts are. So I'm kind of glad that you're doing a project about jurors because I've always had that thought about it.
But you know what, Stephanie, that kind of leads me to think that you would probably be a really good juror.
I feel like I would be. I really would
Yeah.
be. But
I think you might be a really good juror, so don't try to get off if you're ever called jury duty.
okay.
Yeah. There was a question in the chat box about other countries. We are working on a project in the United Kingdom with an organization called Appeal, APPEAL, and they have a project in there called Bound by Injustice, where they work with exonerated men and women and their families and stuff. So we are doing something with them. I've also worked in Taiwan with their Innocence Project in Taiwan. And, you know, I've spoken to other countries, of course, but we have not directly worked with international organizations yet, except for the one in the United Kingdom. So it's kind of like, it's a test case, see if it's going to work really well. I'll let you know.
Other last questions?
Yeah, I have one last question. So did your views or kind of faith in the criminal justice system change at all throughout this process?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was brought up to have absolute 100% faith in the criminal justice system, to the point where I was a huge advocate of the death penalty, right? Because criminal justice doesn't make mistakes. You're in handcuffs. You did something wrong. If you go to prison, you did it. It's fine. Over the last 20 years, of course, as I've become very, very familiar with our criminal justice system, I'm now an abolitionist for the death penalty. I absolutely don't believe in it. I think it's a horrific institution and punishment. But again, I'm going to go back to this thing that I said at the beginning. When you think about the origins of this country, and when we talk about our founding fathers were white, wealthy, land-owning men. That's who created the criminal justice system. That's who wrote our laws. And if you think for one hot second that they wrote those laws to provide protection or justice for people of color, or for the mentally ill, or for the poor, or for immigrants, or for women, you are wrong. They made the laws so that they worked for wealthy, white, landowning men. And so that's the system we have, and that's the system we work in. So when people say to me that the criminal justice system is broken and needs to be fixed, I really need to say it's absolutely not broken. It works exactly the way it was designed. The criminal justice system needs to be rewritten. It needs to be taken apart. I actually don't want to fix the system. I don't think it can be. So for me, I think we need to completely gut it and just redo it and write it from a place that that looks like every 71 people on this Zoom call. It should reflect every single face in this Zoom call.
Really amazing perspective. I hadn't thought about it that way before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had never thought I've never thought about it like that before, but that definitely put it in perspective, in a different perspective.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I just quickly ask a follow-up question on that? Sorry, I'm like in and out with my camera because of bandwidth issues and whatnot. But so do you think in that new system, restorative justice has a bigger place?
Absolutely. Remember, I think restorative justice should be in the center of the new criminal justice system.
Yeah.
That's the way I would like to see it. Yeah. There's a great book, for those of you who are interested, called Until We Reckon. And if you haven't read it, you should. But it is written by a colleague of ours who started an organization called Common Justice. And at the center of her organization are victims. And what she has said, and she's right, is that we need to expand the way we think about victims. And we need to begin to think about our victims from a place of children being born into poverty, children being born into abuse and violence, drugs and alcohol, broken communities. Like, that's where we need to start that conversation. And we need to stop throwing our children away when they're 18 years old and they've made a terrible mistake because we didn't care about them when they were 2 and 3 and 4 and 5.
Thank you.
One last question. Anybody?
Neo, I have not heard a question from a single male person.
I have a question.
Okay, there you go, Fernando.
On the police lineup, like, were you pressured, or like did the officer tell you like, oh, the person that did rape you is in the lineup? Because like I feel like I'm kind of curious about that.
Yeah, they never said those particular words, but the truth is, it's 3 days later. I had gone home to see my family, and I got the phone call that I needed to drive back, which was a 3-hour drive, to look at a lineup. And so as a 22-year-old, or as anybody really who's gone through this horrible violence in your life, and you're called by the police to come take a look at a photographic lineup, it doesn't have to be told to you that there's a suspect in that lineup, right?
Okay.
They don't have to use those words. The reality is, we're going to show you 6 photographs, and in your head, you're thinking, well, then he's in that 6, and my job is to find him. So what they did do was they put a photograph of Ronald in the original photographic lineup that was 3 years old, because it reflected more similar to the composite sketch that I had just helped the police create a few days before that, where his arrest photograph, which they had taken that day, did not look like the composite sketch. So they put in a photograph that was more similar to the composite sketch that I just created. And then once they said, good job, that's who we thought it was, then that was done. I mean, that was just done, right? Bobby Poole's wiped out of my memory, literally forever. And Ronald Cotton becomes the new face of my nightmares.
There's so many things in your case that really touch on a lot of the problems that we talk about when we talk about eyewitness memory. It's interesting. There's been chats about the unconscious transference from Bobby Poole to Ronald Cotton, the feedback effect, issues with composites and doing them at all, and how that influences memory. And yeah, there's just
Yeah.
so many things that happen.
Yeah, it is. One of the things that I wish somebody would do, and maybe you could do it, have your class try to draw a composite sketch of their mothers without looking at their moms.
Yeah, I couldn't do it.
No, none of us can. And you've looked at your mom millions and millions and millions of times, but you really do not know what your mother's ears look like. You really don't. Like if she walked through the room, you could say, that's my mom. But if her nose was like with like in a box of a million other noses, unless there's something really unusual about your mother's nose, it's highly doubtful that you really truly, I mean, really truly know what your mom's nose looks like. You know, kind of. And the reason is, and we'll end on this, but the reason is because we don't compartmentalize human faces. We're not capable of doing that. We see faces in total, but we don't compartmentalize. So while I thought that I was memorizing his eyebrows and his nose and his lips and his ears and his chin, what I was doing was seeing his face in total and then trying to memorize that, right? And then you go to do a composite sketch, and they've got a file box of noses that you look through, and you're picking a nose that's similar to the nose you just saw hours before, but his nose really isn't in that file box, nor are his ears or his chin. And so you come up with a likeness, and as you begin to do that, it's the beginning of the contamination of your memory. And then it just gets worse and worse and worse. So it's very complicated. It's very human. And again, let me just remind everybody that no victim and no survivor in the world wants to get this stuff wrong. So we need to move away from victim blaming, and remember that at the center of every wrongful conviction, there is a guilty person, and that's who's responsible. Bobby Poole is responsible for Ronald Cotton's wrongful conviction.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming in today.
Welcome.
Such an amazing experience, and I know all of us are just, I don't know, thinking about so many things that you said today, including myself, just amazing. As said previously, please go to her website, like and follow on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of those things to help support Healing Justice, which there is a lot of really great information. I was looking at those art pieces as well. Just, yeah, so important. And just so many different things you give us to speak about or think about. And yeah, we really, really appreciate everything that you've done for us today.
You're welcome. And thank you guys for the lovely comments in the chat. So you're all welcome. And I look forward to seeing you on our social media.
Right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.